Everybody, welcome back to the JAMhack, where we talk about the JAMstack. I'm Dustin Goodman, engineering manager at this Labs. With me today is Misko Hevery. Welcome, Misko.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I know this may be a bit unnecessary, but Misko, would you mind introducing yourself for our listeners and viewers, and tell us what you've been up to these days?
Hi, I'm Misko. I think I'm probably best known for Angular and AngularJS. I started the two projects. Also known for had maybe a little something to do with Karma. And before that, I did testing talks on YouTube, which were pretty popular. And I ran a blog post on, hey, testing is a good idea. But I think most people probably know me because of AngularJS.
I definitely would say that's true. I definitely know you because of Angular, but love seeing what you're doing on the internet these days. Looks like you just joined a new company called Builderio. Want to tell
Yes.
us a little bit about what's going on over there, what y'all are working on?
Yeah, so Builder.io is, let's see if I get my marketing pitch right. I'm still learning. It's a visual headless CMS. And I have to break that down for myself, so I'm going to kind of take you along. So CMS means content management system, meaning that non-technical people like marketing department can go and edit the page and change the kind of look and feel. Of course, marketing people love doing that because there's sales to be made and things of that sort, so they continuously change that. So headless means, and this is new to me, headless means that it's served off of your infrastructure. So you own it, you own the technology, etc. As opposed to host it like, where you like go to a third party, but they do all the hosting for you, right? So you own the infrastructure. Therefore, you have to have engineers who kind of build it up, etc. And the one that's unique part is the visual part. That's basically we have a drag and drop editor. And it turns out there are lots of visual hosted CMS systems, but not very many visual headless CMS systems. And so we're kind of unique in this particular category. And of course, marketing people love us because they not only get to change simple text like, what the percent sale is, they can also do more complicated things like add a new image, rearrange things, and basically anything you would kind of do in the visual editor. I recently joined them as a CTO. And my specific goal is I want to make the web fast. And I think e-commerce is a unique place where everybody is trying to make the sites as fast as possible. And if you look at Google page speed, it's kind of red all over. It's very few sites that are actually yellow, and green is essentially a unicorn. It doesn't exist. And so my focus is, or my passion, the thing I want to figure out is how do we make these websites green all throughout?
That's pretty interesting. I've spent a long time in the e-commerce space building actually plugins specifically to help measure marketing metrics. And you're right, those sites aren't the best. And sometimes it's because of plugins and a lot of third-party software. So I guess maybe for my curiosity more than anything, how do you intend on helping to solve maybe that problem in the space? Because I definitely know that drives a lot of that performance way down the tube.
Yeah, so I think there's two problems to be solved. One is basically we use existing frameworks, and all the existing frameworks are what I call replayable, and we can kind of dwell more in depth on what I mean by that. But in the short, it basically means that all these frameworks need to execute and download a huge bunch of code at the very, very beginning. Otherwise, you can't interact with the website. And that's kind of what's slowing you down. So that's one problem. The second problem is you add all kinds of analytics to your websites. And these analytics, for keeping track of page views and all that stuff that marketing people need, is also a secondary problem of all the page speed. And so we would like to solve both of these problems. Specifically for the framework bit, I think if you look at the industry, right, and if you notice that everybody across the industry, it doesn't matter if you're Nike, Gap, Amazon, if everybody in the industry is getting low scores, then maybe it's not their fault, right? Like it would be like few bad apples be like, you just don't know what you're doing. But the fact that everybody gets bad scores across the board, I think that speaks that maybe the way we're thinking about the problem is not the right way. Maybe we as industry, right, is not the best way. And so I want to see if I can introduce some heretical thinking on this particular topic and kind of rearrange the way we think about the problem and see if we can arrive at 100 out of 100 consistently across all these pages.
Love it.
And I don't think I have to mention why speed matters, right? Like every marketing person will tell you that the slower the thing gets loaded, the longer it will take for you to be able to purchase something, which means the less likely you are to purchase something, right? So this speed is directly involved in revenue generation, and so people pay attention and people try really hard, and they kind of are not really succeeding.
I think I remember a metric, which is for every almost half a second it takes for your site to load, that's a percent of total overall conversion that you just lost.
Something
So
like that, yeah.
yeah, it's something insane. It's like for somebody like Walmart, I mean, that could be what, a few $1 million,
Yeah.
maybe more than that per day,
I,
easily.
I think people are what's the word I'm looking for? We're impulsive, right? And so somebody sees a tweet saying like there's awesome shoes, go buy them, and so you're just like tempted to click on it and see if you can purchase it. And if the site doesn't load fast enough, you're like, you know what, I don't really need the shoes, and you walk away. You probably didn't need the shoes to begin with, but
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, I would say. So
yeah.
you said something earlier though that I want to jump back to because it was really interesting to me. I mean, especially since we're talking about the JAMstack today. You mentioned that y'all are building a visual headless CMS, and I'm personally trying to picture the visual side of a CMS. I've used some other traditional CMSs, headless CMSs, Sanity, Contentful, um, and usually when there's a visual aspect to it, it it doesn't quite become headless anymore. It becomes more like I'm building the page itself. So what's the
Mhm.
visual aspect, I guess, in terms of what you all are trying to do? Is it, hey, here's the
Yeah.
general layout of your page, and you're able to drag those elements and edit them in
Mhm.
place, but then they get rendered completely differently when they're actually implemented? Or
Yeah. So let's dive into the technology. Like, your listeners love technology, right? Let's dive deep, right?
yeah,
Uh,
please.
so normal CMS systems, the way they work is that you um, essentially you load the page, and the page makes a request to the CMS system, and CMS returns essentially a JSON, a key value pair, saying for this key, this is the value, and so on and so forth. And these keys then get inserted in, like, oh, this key is really the image that I should load for the hero, and this key is actually the text to show to the person, and so on and so forth, right? As you can see in this model, you can't really decide like, oh, I want an extra image, or I want to make it from 3 columns to 2 columns, or change a hero to 3-column mode. Like, you can't do any of this stuff because you don't have control over it, right? And so what you really have is you have a fixed layout, a fixed page, and the only thing the marketing people can do is they can change colors, they can change text, they can change images, but they fundamentally can't change the structure of the page. Right? With a visual editor, you actually get a full WYSIWYG editor, right? What you see is what you get editor. When you can drag things around, you can say, I want to add columns, I want to add buttons, I want to add tags, text, what have you. Just throw it in and literally lay out the page. And the difference is that instead of going to a CMS system and saying, give me a basically JSON where I'm trying to insert into the page, what you actually get back is you say, give me either the HTML, or you say, give me a JSON that actually represents the three-dimensional structure of the page, or two-dimensional structure of the page, right? And then you use that information to actually drive the rendering pipeline. So if you're using a React website or Angular website or whatever the backend technology you happen to be using, that JSON is actually what drives the component rendering, so that more components get downloaded and buttons and things get added and so on and so forth, right?
Hmm.
So the visual part really allows you to be much, much richer. And you can say, like, what happens if I change a single hero landing page to a 3-column landing page? How does that affect the conversion rate? And you can run an A/B test, and you can get that information, and you can do that. So it's a lot more powerful thing than just being able to change the text or color with the visual system. So that's kind of where the visual thing comes in. And it is kind of tricky because you're right. You're no longer downloading just key value pairs. You're now actually downloading full-on structure of the page, including styles, colors, style sheets, animations, everything else that goes with it.
So I'd be remiss not to bring up JavaScript in this and talk
Mhm.
about some of the front end frameworks that people are using these days. How would you kind of suppose people who are using something like Next in the React world, or Nuxt in the Vue world, or I don't know if Angular Universal is still a project, but if that's still around, how would you suspect people building e-commerce sites with your headless CMS would actually integrate it?
So the way it works out is that on the back end, you you have normal web page, right? Saying like this is a landing page or something of that sort, and you take the area, you basically subdivide the page. It could be the whole page, but usually you subdivide the page and you say like this box right here is going to be controlled by Builder.io, and so you're going to replace that with the Builder.io component, and that component obviously gets keys or whatever, and then that component actually calls out and fetches the data in, and it is done in such a way that the Builder.io component knows how to call back into you. So your engineers can create things like hovers or little product icons or product details and so on. And then the marketing person just kind of collects them and puts them in the particular layout. So that the engineers can focus on what they love to do, which is create new things, and marketing people don't have to bother engineers saying like change the percentage from 15 to 10% because next weekend is a sale, which no engineer wants to do. And so by separating it out, the marketing people is free to go ahead and do these kinds of changes and schedule these changes, and the engineers can focus on like, hey, how do I make my product detail page even more interactive and have even cooler features in there?
That's pretty awesome. I love it. So, let me ask you maybe a question that you've thought about, maybe you haven't thought about, but JAMstack, uh, what this show is named after and it's all about, uh, it has a lot of meaning to different people on the internet. And I guess my question for you is, what does JAMstack mean to you and your team, maybe? And maybe what's some of the context or requirements that led your team to build something that's very JAMstack tangential?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to be honest with you. I am not an expert on JAMstack or all these other things. I consider myself more of a technologist in the pure sense, as in like the frameworks and how to set these things up. But I know that a lot of people use JAMstack to build their commerce websites, or they use Next or Nuxt or whatever, all these other technologies, right? And we then have to basically figure out how to integrate with these technologies, right? So we provide components that just essentially just drop in to whatever backend technology you happen to have, whether it's framework technology like React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, and so on, or whether it's kind of the glue technology like Next, JAMstack, and so on. And you can just bring in the Builder.io components. But the place where it gets kind of interesting is, we have to make sure that it's fast, and then we can integrate it with what you have, right? So typically, it would not be very useful if you could control a piece of content, but you wouldn't be able to add your own components, right? Like when engineers create something specific, like special kind of a product icon that you can hover over or something, or maybe it's 3D and you want to be able to zoom and rotate, etc. You want to be able to allow the marketing people to just drag that particular component and drop it into that particular location, and without having kind of a deep integration with the existing technologies that are underneath it, this wouldn't be possible and kind of be limited to what you can achieve. And so part of the magic is that we know how to do that, that we can let engineers do what they love to do, and then we can have marketing people do their own thing.
That's pretty awesome. So, in this kind of scenario, I'm going to pull Next because it's just so exciting and people are doing React. Maybe not your specialty being Papa Angular, but in that ecosystem, a lot of people are using headless CMSs specifically to pull content, generate JSON, and compile down into components. And then they're building their custom components in the application and doing the rendering. Are you saying there's a way to take those custom components that we're rendering and kind of implement them within Builder.io so our marketers can understand kind of what's
Mm-hmm.
available at their fingertips?
So that's what you have today. And I kind of thought that this technology was exciting, that's why I joined. But I have other ideas of how to make it even more exciting. We can talk about that later. But yes, that's exactly the point, is that these existing technology, these existing components need to be made available to the marketers, so the marketers can combine them in new and exciting ways, right?
And I guess then is Builder.io JavaScript framework agnostic, or does it have to consume it in a particular way?
No. One of the magical bits, and the reason I kind of joined, is that we have internal technology we call JSX Lite. It's a kind of a misnomer, so I apologize for that. But the basic idea is that you can lay out your page in essentially a framework agnostic way, and then we can push a button and generate whatever output you happen to have on your backend. So whether you're using Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, Next, or JAMstack, it doesn't matter. We know how to generate the code specific for your platform, and because of that, right, people choose their technologies for various different reasons, and we can integrate with all of them. And so the kind of the value add we have here is that we can do this conversion. Like we can take visual code and spit out components that are specific to your stack and specific to your configuration. And this is really what allows this kind of the headless magic, right? Because unless you can do that, unless you can generate the components that your backend can consume, you end up in this world of key value pairs, right? This JSON that basically says you get to choose, this particular variable, and let's say this variable considers a image height or image color or the image URL, right? And that's all you can change and nothing else. By generating the code that the backend uses, you seamlessly integrate into it. It's as if the engineers that were on your team have produced that code and we just insert it into your website.
That's pretty amazing. So we kind of now talked about like how we take our engineered solution, get it to the CMS. We talked a little bit about how the marketers are going to integrate and build out their content. How are they now, the engineers now going to take that content back from the marketers? I know we talked, generally there's an API, but is it GraphQL? Is it a REST endpoint? Is it something completely new and special that y'all have created?
That part is not really that exciting. It's right now it's just there's two ways we can deliver this thing. We can deliver it as both JSON and an HTML. The advantages of HTML is that it's super fast, but there are some tricks that you have to do with respect to rehydrating of the application, and we can talk about that later because I have some amazing ideas on it, and I'm working on this new thing called Qwik that tries to address this. But the other way to do it is just to send a JSON, which is Builder.io specific, nothing standard, because I don't think there's any standards, way of describing the page. And then this JSON is used in the browser to build out all the components so that they integrate with the existing components that your engineering team provides, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the code we generate is super efficient and super fast, but just like the rest of the industry, we can't get as amazing numbers as we would like, right? And the reason for that is because you have to back up and you have to say, like, well, why can't you get good numbers, right? And I think it's important to go backwards, right? Because the thing that Google PageSpeed is measuring is something called time to interactive, right? And interactive really means you were able to register a listener on your DOM, and therefore, when the user interacts with the page, whether click or mouse move or what have you, right, something useful can happen. And so all frameworks basically have this problem that they have server-side rendering component that render HTML. HTML sends to the client super fast, amazingly. Everybody loves it. It's cacheable in a CDN, right? It shows up at your code, but it's dead code. Like, it doesn't do anything. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to bootstrap your application. And in order to, for the framework, in order to register all the listeners, the framework has to execute the templates because the listeners are sprinkled inside of templates, right? And so in order for them to execute the templates, well, templates have to be downloaded. But it's not just execution of the templates. Turns out templates requires really a merge of template and data. And so you have to be able to generate the data so that you can merge into the template so that you can spit out the DOM and the listeners, right? And so you kind of go back and you say, like, well, all I want to do is make the page interactive. But in order to do that, I have to download the templates. But in order to execute the templates, I have to download the code that generates the data. And so I have to really pretty much download the whole application in order for me to figure out where the listeners are. And oh, by the way, I have to execute the whole application and re-render. And this is where I say the word replay, you have to replay all of the work that the server just did on the client so that the client can figure out where the listeners are. Right? The only thing you really want to know is like, where are the click listeners so that the user can click on them, right? But instead, you end up in this world of like, well, yeah, but in order to figure this out, I have to pretty much download the whole application, execute the whole application, and then I can know this information. And then I have to attach all the listeners, right? And so the end result of all this is that if you think about it, like this is kind of like almost intentionally designed to be slow. Right?
I mean, it sounds like it. You just described 20 steps to me.
Right, but like all frameworks do this, every single one. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, you'll end up in this particular category. And there's little differences, maybe this one's 10% faster than this one, but fundamentally, this is kind of where you end up with. And then on top of that, everybody sends all the analytics, and it's even more blocking code that has to execute. And this is the reason why sites are slow, right? And so what we really want, in the land of magic mushrooms where you can have anything, what you really want is you want to be able to send HTML across and nothing else, right? Because, well, why am I executing, all these templates when the server just did this for me? So like the whole point of rehydration is that if everything goes right, the user doesn't notice anything, right? So the fact that you shouldn't notice anything really tells you that, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing anything here because there's nothing to be done. But you have to do it because these frameworks need to rebuild internal state. And the internal state includes like where the for loops are, where the if statements are, where the listeners are. Basically, everything internal that the application needs has to be rebuilt for this to work. So what you really want is you just want to send the HTML across and nothing else. And so this is where the new way of thinking about the problem comes in. And so Qwik is this new framework that we're working on at Builderio. And what Qwik does is it sends the HTML across, and it sends a tiny little JavaScript. And when I say tiny, I mean less than a kilobyte.
Whoa.
It is so tiny that it is more efficient to inline it into index.html than to have the script tag in there make a request, because the request will actually take you more time than just inlining it into the index.html, right? So we're talking about 1 kilobyte. Now, the other thing about it is it doesn't matter how big your application gets. It will always be 1 kilobyte. You can get the most complicated, ridiculous large application. It's always just going to be a kilobyte. I think right now it's about 700 bytes or something like that. So it's actually less than a kilobyte. And this thing, what it does, it sets up a global listener for the whole page and says, if anybody interacts with the page, I want to know about it in any way. And this execution takes less than a millisecond. So we're talking about less than a kilobyte, less than a millisecond to kind of get it up and going. And all you're doing is you're basically setting up a global listener for the whole page. So any interaction will get fed through this particular thing. And all of this 1 kilobyte knows how to do is that when you interact with a page, it will lazily only then download the behavior required for that button and that button only, right? There's a big difference between downloading the whole application and then executing the whole thing versus being able to just download the behavior associated with a specific button and nothing else, right? So there's 2 things you're doing. First, you're delaying stuff. And second thing you're doing is you're chopping up this humongous app that's monolith into a little tiny small chunks so that, me trying to hover over a image of a product, and which brings up, the detailed magnifier, the standard thing we're kind of used for. Like, why in the world would that piece of code need to bring down shopping cart or the menu system or settings page or anything else, right? None of that other stuff should ever be brought down, because the only thing I'm really interested in is hovering over the image and seeing the detail, right? So 2 parts that have to be solved. First, don't download the code at the beginning. And the second part is break the application down into these tiny, tiny little chunks so that it can be lazy loaded. And so the Qwik knows how to do this. And what I mean by that is that you don't have to think about the problem in a different way. Like, we've been conditioned as an industry. We as an industry have been conditioned to kind of look at the problem in the standard way. And basically the standard way I would describe is like, throw a bunch of engineers, they build up this application, ship it to production, and then somebody says, but it's big and slow. And at that point, sorry, too late. There's very little you can do to kind of fix this, right? or the amount of effort involved to kind of fix this is gargantuous. And even if you do manage to fix it, you will very quickly backslide because somebody's going to do something that is unintentional and it's going to cause you trouble. You're laughing because you've been there, you've done that, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Way too many times. Way too many times.
And I'm going to say that the issue isn't really with the industry, but the issue is with our mental model about the way we think about it, right? If you look at existing frameworks, none of the existing frameworks have the concept of lazy loading as a core primitive, right? They all claim to do lazy loading. They say, like, sure, yeah, of course you can do lazy loading with us. Go do something over there, you know? But none of the existing frameworks actually have a core primitive that talks about like lazy loading, right? And that's a big hint to kind of tell you that, like, yeah, probably it's more of a marketing fluff than actual core primitive of a framework. And so the big difference with Qwik is we kind of flip it around and say, no, let's assume that the thing we're trying to optimize is time to interactive, and let all the other decisions be driven by that, right? And it's a fundamentally different kind of framework, because if you look at existing frameworks, what you really are deciding upon or arguing about or like trading off is kind of the developer ergonomics, you know? It's really like a debate of like, well, do you like React JSX or do you like Angular selectors, right? Which one do you like better? They both have pros and cons, but really none of it really actually matters about the performance of the website. It really has to matter about the opinions of the developers and what they particularly like or prefer, right? What I'm saying is, no, you have to look at it from a different point of view and say like, hey, how do I, forget the actual syntax for a second. How do I design the application so that it is lazy loadable and it can have a fast startup time? And how do I take these concepts and present them to the developer from day one and give them strong guardrails that says, hey, you need to do it in this particular way, because if you don't, you're going to end up in a slow world. And so if you want to be in a fast world, you have to do these things and have the framework kind of guide you through it so that you don't accidentally end up somewhere else. And I'm going to argue that that's a fundamentally different thing. Like, it's a different animal.
I agree with that. Somebody, I don't know who it was on Twitter yesterday, but they were showing how they were lazy loading a Firebase CLI and SDK into their application because they thought it was just too slow to import it and load it up front. And they were seeing almost, I mean, we're talking seconds of improved load time and increase in bundle size. So Qwik almost sounds like it's, instead of making that an abstract solution to what somebody's working on, it's almost flipping it on its head and making it the norm. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. But there's more to it than that. So one of the things we talk about with Qwik is that existing frameworks are replayable. And we kind of talked about it in the sense that when the framework gets downloaded to the client and the framework wakes up, it has to replay everything on the server just did in order to get the client in the same exact state as the server was when we captured the DOM, and then we can continue from that point forward, right? So the big difference with Qwik is that Qwik is what I call resumable. In other words, at any point in time, you can freeze dry the application, and usually this means on a server, right? Ship it to the client, and then it will just continue where the server left off. It doesn't have to replay anything. So if you have some, for example, initialization code that only ever happens at the startup of the application, that code actually will never even download to the client because the client just resumes where the server left off. And because it's initialization code, that just never runs. And so the client never has a need to even download this particular piece of code. And so when we talk about Qwik, we talk about this idea of resumability, which is that you just take the HTML on a server and then you just resume it on the client. Now, in order to do this, you have to solve one very interesting trick. And that is that the reason why frameworks are replayable is because they have to rebuild internal state, right? A framework has lots of internal state, and the reason why it's replayable is because it's trying to rebuild it. And the way it rebuilds the internal state is by executing the templates. And to execute the templates, you have to download them and all those problems we kind of talked about, right? So The big difference with Qwik is that the Qwik is stateless. There is nothing to replay. There's nothing to rebuild. But you say, well, every framework has to have state, so where do you keep state? Well, we keep all of the state in the DOM in form of attributes all the time. So at any point in time, you can just take the DOM, inner HTML to get the HTML out of it, put it somewhere else, inner HTML back into its position where it was, and just continue where you left off, because the framework is stateless. It's a complete amnesia. It doesn't even know that it used to be somewhere else. It just looks at the DOM and says, oh, these things depend on these things or whatever, and I'll just continue where I left off. And I think it's kind of heretical, right? Because we have been fighting the DOM for so long, and Qwik is basically coming along and says, you know what? Let's not fight DOM. Let's just learn to love it for what it is. And it kind of reminds me, if you go back like 10, 15 years, where everybody was fighting JavaScript. And they're saying like, no, JavaScript's a horrible language. If you only had a better language, you'll have so much easier time building the web, right? And we tried it over and over, and every single one of those attempts failed. TypeScript being the only exception, I'm going to say the reason it succeeded is because TypeScript didn't want to change JavaScript, right? It just said, JavaScript, I love you for what you are. I'm not going to judge you or anything like that. And I'm just going to add the few missing bits that you need, and I'm going to get out of the way, right? And that's why TypeScript succeeded, where everybody else failed. And I think we're in the kind of the next phase where we have learned to love JavaScript, but we have not yet learned to love DOM. And so we are hating on DOM, and we are abstracting it away and pretending it doesn't exist and all this stuff. I think it's time to just kind of, take DOM for what it is, and say, we love you the way you are, and just move on. And I think this is the kind of the next stage in the evolution here.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess something I have kind of two questions now about Qwik. First one is, do you see Qwik as a standalone framework or more as a standalone library to help other frameworks kind of move themselves along?
Yeah. Library framework is such a
I know,
contentious statement.
Well, I'm asking because I'm hearing what Qwik is, and it's so small and it packages and it writes to the DOM, and it doesn't sound like it would be something I would want to run side by side with an Angular project or something with a React project.
Just to be clear, Qwik is not 1 kilobyte. The Qwik loader is 1 kilobyte.
Okay, there we go. I missed something there.
The Qwik itself, library framework, call it whatever you, right? I forget the exact numbers, I haven't minified it, but like it's somewhere on the range of 26, standard size for a framework/library for what it does. That's not the point. The point is that it can be delayed, right? And you don't have to download it until once you need it. And it can be resumed. So the way the Qwik library/framework is framework.
I think at this point it's a framework. I was envisioning it more kind of like early day React style, but it's sounding more kind of towards the Angular line of thought.
Yeah, it is probably because, okay, so I want to explain why. If you have a library, what you need to have is you need to have a bootstrap, right? You need to have this thing that says like, when I wake up, call this main function, for lack of a better term, right? And this main function then like fetches all the stuff and sets it up and kind of gets the thing going, right? And the thing you realize once you have a bootstrap is that it's your Achilles heel. It is the thing that prevents you from doing lazy loading. It's the thing that prevents you from, adapting to what specific behavior the user did, and based on that, doing a different thing. And so, Qwik doesn't actually have a bootstrap. And it is not something that I intentionally designed. Like, it's just something that we kind of walked into, because one of the properties of Qwik that you want is that, like, depending on which part of the app I click on or interact with, I really want to have a unique bootstrap for that particular thing. And so one way to think about it is that, Qwik has essentially endless numbers of ways you can bootstrap yourself, because it really depends on how you choose to interact with the page. Because if I click on a buy button, I will need to download a different set of code and download, bootstrap myself in a different way than if I go and click on a product detail. Like, it's a very fundamentally different thing. And so as and it's different. And if I click on the menu bar at the top, like different stuff actually happens then again. And so you can interact with the page in lots and lots of different ways, essentially infinite number of ways. And in the same way, we actually want to have infinite number of ways of bootstrapping ourselves. So as a result, like Qwik doesn't even have a bootstrap, and that's kind of the mind bend about it. It's the way you start interacting with the page that the code starts downloading, and then the Qwik framework, because it's stateless, allows you to continue execution where you left off, because the state information is actually in the DOM.
So that brings me to my second question that I didn't ask earlier, which is about state. I mean, I love this idea of an essentially stateless framework, but what happens when I do have more complex interactions on my site that do need some level of state? How are you predicting to solve that problem?
So all websites have lots and lots of state. And I didn't say that Qwik builds stateless websites. I said the Qwik itself is stateless. So actually, any kind of e-commerce website, even an application, doesn't matter. There's going to be tons of state, right? Everything from product name, pricing, how much quantity, what's in your shopping cart, on and on and on. The list is huge of all the state that you have. And so one of the things Qwik does is it makes sure that the application state is actually serialized into the DOM. So that when you go and resume the application on the client, and, the shopping cart already knows 5 things that are already in there, and he knows the quantities for those things, and he knows all the other things that go with it, right? So that you don't have to download it. You don't have to go to the server and be like, hey, what does shopping cart even contain at this point? All of that information is actually serialized and in the DOM in a way that it's easily recoverable and can continue. What I said is that the framework itself is stateless, right? And because the framework itself is stateless, you can take the application that's running in one place, like for example the server, and you can freeze drag by inner HTMLing it, shipping the HTML to the client, and continue execution. And the framework won't even notice the fact that this happened, because the framework is stateless at all times. Now, that actually opens up some really bizarre things that I didn't even know about at the beginning, but I'm kind of discovering, and I'm getting super excited about it. So for example, one thing that's super hard to do with existing frameworks is to say like, hey, something is not on a screen, don't bother rendering it, right? Everybody's talking about like, we should do this, but nobody knows how, because, well, like let's take React, for example. Like React has to build up the VDOM for the whole application, and then maybe a subset of the VDOM will get rendered the screen. But like you already lost it, right? Because you have to download all of the code so that you can build up the VDOM for the whole application. And then like, oh great, you're gonna do small optimization and only render part of it. But you already downloaded the code, like you already did the expensive bit, like so you kind of lost the gamble here already. And so what you really want to be able to do is say like, look, this stuff is not even on the page, don't even bother downloading it. And that's super hard. But if you're stateless, that actually becomes super easy, because you wake up and you have some HTML, some DOM structure. Remember, you're stateless, and so all the information is already in the DOM. And so you can look at a component and say like, hey, is this component visible? Yes or no? And that's easy to do, because you can just say like, hey, what's the viewport rectangle? What's the component rectangle? Do they overlap? Yes, no, right? And if the answer is no, then you're like, why would I download the template for it? Like, let's not even bother downloading the template. Let's just skip this thing. Like, this doesn't need to be updated right now. And then you scroll up, and the component comes to the view, and then you notice that the rectangles overlap, and then you're like, oh, right, now I have to update it because it's marked dirty. So let me go download the template for it and re-execute it and update it, right? It becomes super easy to do. Now, another example is, I'm sure you've seen this endless pages that like you come to a landing page and like it scrolls forever, right? At some point, not only JavaScript is a problem, but the HTML is a problem as well. So ideally, you just want to send the HTML that's above the fold and not even bother sending the HTML below the fold, right? Again, this is a huge problem. Like if you're a classical framework like React, Angular, or Svelte, you're going to end up in some form of virtual DOM where you like the whole thing gets executed, and now you're trying to just be efficient and say like, oh, let's not render the whole thing because some of it's below the fold, but you already paid the price of downloading the whole application, so you're just it's a peephole optimization. It's not a major thing you could do, right? But in the case of Qwik, because everything is stateless and all the state is in the DOM itself, you ship the top part only, And you just tell the Qwik loader, like, hey, if somebody starts scrolling, go download the secondary HTML and an inner HTML at the end, right? And because everything is stateless, the fact that more HTML shows up later, Qwik doesn't even know that actually happened until you interact with the page. Oh, look, there's a bunch of components here that like, have some internal state, whatever. Like, sure, I'll wake them up and do whatever they ask me to do. But the fact that you can just download and append to the existing running application without disturbing what the existing application is already doing is a kind of an interesting idea. And something that, again, is super, super hard to do when you have the mental model of that the framework keeps the state of the application in the JavaScript heap, right? As long as you're going to keep the state of the application in JavaScript heap, you'll have all these constraints. So the big innovation for Qwik is to kind of flip it upside down and say, like, no, we're not going to keep the state in the JavaScript heap. We're going to keep the state together with the physical representation of the component in the DOM itself. And because we're keeping it together, the lazy loading becomes easy because you just get inner HTML that you put somewhere, and there's your component all materialized with its state and ready to go and continue because everything is fully resumable, nothing is replayable. And so just these things just kind of work out of the box. And it's kind of exciting, if you ask me.
I mean, I kind of want to get my hands dirty with it. Is there somewhere people like me who aren't working on Builder can start accessing Qwik today? And
yes, so we have a couple of things. We have open source repo. It's a very, very early stage, etc. But we have a demo on there. And specifically, I think the folks at StackBlitz are amazing because they figured out a way of putting Node inside of your browser. I don't know if you know about this. This is amazing.
Got to work on it with them, actually. Super fun.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Super fun. Super amazing. Blow my mind. But it's perfect for our demo because the big difference with Qwik is that it isn't really just a client-side framework, right? It straddles client and server because it really talks about like, hey, I need to get the application running on a server, executing, serializing it into HTML and ship it to the client, and then resuming it where it left off, all in a kind of a seamless fashion. And so to really show off Qwik, you really need to have a server-side rendering thing, and therefore you need to have Node. And so the fact that StackBlitz can do this is absolutely amazing, and it really shows up. So anyways, so there's a StackBlitz over there that you can go do, and you can actually see this in action. And you can see how everything works, and you can also see how we serialize all of the information into the DOM. And that idea that no state is kept in a JavaScript heap, rather all the state is kept in a DOM, is kind of the unique thing that opens up all of these new possibilities and opens up ways both about thinking about the problem and also solving the problems in a way that existing approaches just cannot touch.
That makes plenty of sense. And this is super cool to me because, I mean, whole idea is we're talking about JAMstack, and I almost feel like you've just flipped the entire idea of what the JAMstack is on its head. And I feel like a combination of Builder or any other CMS plus Qwik is going to replace what we know as the JAMstack today. At least that's my opinion, based off what you shared today.
I'm not sure it's going to be necessarily replacing it, but it's going to certainly augment it in the same sense that, like, hey, instead of using frameworks that are replayable with your JAMstack, right? Could you use a framework that is resumable? And one of the key things that we're looking into, we haven't gotten very far with, but I think it's important, is that there needs to be seamless hooks to existing frameworks, right? So that Qwik can just be kind of the orchestrator that you come and get your application up and running very quickly, but then Qwik can pull in the legacy code that you have in these old old ways of doing things, and be allowing you to kind of reuse the code base without having to rewrite everything.
That makes sense. Well, I guess I have a question for you then, which is, given the state of the JAMstack as you understand it today, given what you're working on in your personal projects, where do you see the JAMstack as an idea going in the next 3 to 5 years?
You're asking tough questions that I don't have the answers to.
That's my job, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think things like JAMstack will stay here for a long time. But as I said, we need to figure out a way to make faster websites, right? And this is a thing that idea has come. And this is one of those things that unless you focus on from the very beginning, right? Our computers constantly are getting faster and more memory and everything, and we still can't get the applications up and running because people are just like, oh, look at all this faster. So let me just do bigger images, amazing movies, and like all this stuff gets added to it, right? And you always end up in like, there's like a couple of seconds to load the page territory. And so what I see for the future is that I think it's time. I think the time has come where people are starting to say, we want to make sure that our application, that our websites are not just beautiful and amazing, but also quick at startup. And I think the world is kind of slowly starting to realize that they can't get there with the current set of technologies, right? And so, and the reason they can't get there is because all of the existing set of technologies, they argue about little tiny differences of syntax, but fundamentally they're all the same things, which is that they are designed for building applications with desktop mental model, right? On a desktop, you don't have this idea of lazy loading. You don't have this idea of downloading code. You don't have this idea of dynamically putting in more code. Like none of these ideas really exist in the desktop world. And that's really how we build applications, right? We took a bunch of desktop engineers and we said, like, go build us, a bunch of web apps, but they brought their desktop mentality with them and they designed these frameworks, and I'm guilty of this as well, with this mentality. And the end result, which is completely not obvious, and it took years of kind of reflection to kind of realize, is that the reason why we are in this situation is because the frameworks or the applications we build are replayable, right? And as long as the applications stay being replayable, we have no hope of improving this situation. We need to get to the world where the applications are resumable, where they can continue where the server side left off. And that's the only way to get this super fast startup that we're looking for.
That makes plenty of sense. I'm excited to see kind of what Qwik does to the entire JAMstack ecosystem, as well as the entire front-end ecosystem, and how it pushes us to start kind of flipping that idea and start figuring out how not to do replayable frameworks and start bootstrapping, or not bootstrapping, but continuing execution from the point in time it's delivered to the client. Well, Misko, is there anything you wanted to share with our viewers about Builder, about Qwik, that you haven't already shared with us today?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for like entertaining me here for an hour and letting me speak about my baby. I appreciate that so much. So
It's
kind
been
of you.
fun. I've been enjoying this.
Good. So there is one thing, which is kind of the secret plan, right? And so the thing is, what I'm realizing is that Builder.io has lots and lots of customers that either use JAMstack or Next or any other technology, whether both the server-side technologies as well as the frameworks. And Builder can generate human canonical code so that it could be just dropped into these technologies for kind of the UI. And because of that, it is relatively easy for Builder.io customers to just kind of, and eventually one day, push a button, and we will generate Qwik code for you instead. And so for Builder.io customers, it's going to become a very nice migration story to these new technologies, right? So the idea is that as we develop this technology, we integrate it with Builder.io, and then Builder.io customers will be able to automatically take benefit from the fact that, like, hey, all of a sudden their websites will become amazingly fast. There's going to require some work on their engineers as well, but like, ramp it up from the simple websites to get more and more complicated and get these benefits. So this is really why I'm excited. And this is really why I joined Builder.io, is because I saw a need, which is, hey, websites are slow. I didn't know how to really, I kind of had ideas on how to solve it, but I didn't know how to bring this to the world. Like, I think one of the problem is that the world is kind of saturated with existing frameworks. And so you can't just bring yet another kind of framework that's fundamentally the same as everything else, right? You need to really rethink stuff from the bottom. And so where this thing comes together is that Qwik is that fundamental rethink about everything and how you think about it and how you should do applications that are super fast. And then Builder.io is the other part that comes in, which is that it brings in the existing customers that have a need. And because all the code is generated from Builder.io, it's really relatively easily to start generating Qwik as the output and then bring all the customers along. And once that happens, you all of a sudden have a bunch of people in the wild who have amazing test scores, and the whole rest of the industry is going to be like, why is the rest of the world have amazing test scores and we don't? What do we need to do to get there? And the answer is, well, you need to get off your replayable stack and get onto a resumable stack, because that's really the only way to get there. And I think that's going to be kind of the forcing function, and it's going to be the thing that will get people going, right? Right now, people are in this state where like, yeah, the situation's bad, but it's bad for everybody, so nothing's on fire, right?
Yeah.
Once you get to the world where like, there is a subset of things that are amazing, but the rest of it is kind of bad, like now you have a gradient that I think people will start flowing towards.
I love it. Well, Misko, thanks again for coming and speaking with me today. Before we wrap up, where can people find you on the internet?
I think I've been found on Twitter with Hevery. Also GitHub, Hevery, as kind of the primary places to find me. I've been putting together a bunch of blog posts on this particular topic, and I've been tweeting about it, etc. And I think it's a very long educational journey that we're in front of. And specifically, the journey is that people are tired of all these new frameworks for good reason. And the educational journey is to kind of explain, like, look, this is not yet another framework that does things slightly differently. It is a complete rethought about how they approach the particular problem. And this education of like, hey, just think about the problem in a different way is something that cannot be explained in a single blog post, right? So there's a whole series of blog posts on this particular topic. And so that's what I'm kind of trying to do lately with both the blog posts and the Twitter.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again for coming. Everybody else, thank you for tuning in. This has been the JAMstack. Oh, no, not the JAMstack, the JAMhack.